Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mohammad Khairulanwar, and today I want to talk about introduction of monetary policies and fiscal policies. Okay, let's see at a glance of these policies. Monetary policies involve manipulating interest rate and money supply, and it is the job of the Federal Open Market Committee (FOMC). For fiscal policy, determine how the existing supply of money will be spent. It is the responsible of the US Congress and the President who use tax policy and spending legislation to achieve economic stability. Let's go for the details. Monetary policies have two economic conditions, that is expansionary policies and contractionary policies. For expansionary policies, this is when the central bank use it to stimulate the economy. The generally goes to increase money supply and ease credit in hope of boosting economic growth. Example of expansionary policies are the reduction of interest rate and reserve requirements. For contractionary policies, this is when the central bank use it to curb the rate of monetary expansion and cool down an overheat economy. An example would be to increase interest rate and increase reserve requirement to reduce money supply. There are three tools to implement monetary policies. First is open market operation. This involves the buying and selling of government securities or the other assets. Securities dealers do business with the federals in open market, whereby they compete on the basis of price. Second, discount rates. The federal controls the interest rate on short-term loans issued to banks. Third, reserve requirement. The federal also dictate how much in reserve bank must be maintained, either in the vault or on deposit with the Federal Reserve Bank. Who's control monetary policies? As the nation's central bank, the Federal Reserve control money policies for the US. The Federal Open Market Committee (FOMC) gathers 8 times a year to discuss the outlook for the US economy and consider various monetary policy options that could be implemented. The goals of monetary policies is aimed to aid balancing money supply, interest rate, and available credit in order to foster stable long-term growth in the economy and control inflations. There are limitations and challenges for monetary policies. First, the federal can only exert control over certain variables. It can indirectly control the monetary base and short-term interest rate. Through asset purchases, it can indirectly influence long-term interest rate. Second, the federal can only push its policy so far. It could be forced, for example, to reduce rates to zero or even let them go negative, yet still not be able to stimulate the economy. Third, economists often disagree on which monetary policy should be employed for the best result. And fourth, most policies involve trade-off. Purchasing assets to reduce long-term rates, for example, could result in unintended asset bubbles. Okay, let's move to fiscal policies. Fiscal policies have two economic conditions, that is expansionary and contractionary. For expansionary, the government can aid the economy to recover or grow by decreasing personal taxation, which should lead to an increase in consumption. A decrease in corporate taxes should lead to increased investment and growth. An increase in government spending can create new jobs or can even take the form of direct stimulus payments to those negatively affected by natural disaster and pandemics. Next is contractionary. Similarly, when the government wants to cool off excessively rapid growth, it can increase taxes or decrease government spending programs. The government used two main tools to establish its fiscal policies. First is taxes. By modifying the tax code for individuals and businesses, the government can influence investment, affect employment, and even influence foreign trades. Next is government spending. Spending can be directed toward various sectors of economy such as infrastructure, defense, public work, government employments, subsidies, public health or research and welfare programs. whose control fiscal policies. The federal government controls fiscal policies through the coordinate effort of the executive and legislative branches. The executive branches relies heavily upon the Secretary of Treasury and the Council of Economic Advisors for advice. The goals of fiscal policy is intended to mediate the effect of business cycles, maximize employment, react to external influence such as natural disaster, and control the country budget deficit. There are limitations and challenges for fiscal policies. First is raising and lowering taxes cannot be done at will and very often for practical purpose. Second, when trying to expand the economy, the country deficit can increase if government spending exceeds tax revenue. Third, when trying to contract the economy by raising the taxes, tax evasions can often increase and political backlash can occur. Fourth, there can often be a time delay between the approval of government fiscal policies and the time it takes to put those policies into operation. Let's conclude difference between fiscal and monetary policies. Monetary policies is implemented by the Federal Reserve Bank, which operate independently from the federal government. The federal focus on adjusting the nation's and supply of money and credits, changing interest rates, and modifying bank reserve requirements. Fiscal policy focuses more on demand side of the economy and is shaped by the executive and legislative branches of US government. The federal government relies on taxes and government spending as its primary tools. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mohammad Faisal bin Abidin. So today I will present about fiscal policy and monetary policy on how it's work and how to measure. Macroeconomy was created for two reasons. The first one is to measure overall economy, and the second one is to fix it if there are a problem when it's come to measuring the economy. There are only three possible things that could be happening at any given period of time. The economy can be in a recession, it can be at full employment, or it can have an inflationary gap. Now, let's analyze how to fix the problem. The problem number one is the recession, and the problem number two is inflation. Let's start with a recession. If there is a recession, we have only three different options we can use. We can do no policy at all, which is just wait it out. We can use fiscal policy, or we can use monetary policy. What you need to know is how do these things affect the overall economy and what's happened on the graph. For example, we take no policy action at all in a recession. What's going to happen to aggregate supply? Well, since we have high employment, eventually wages are going to go down and resources price will go down, which cost will go down, and the aggregate supply will shift to the right. This will put us back at full employment. So, remember the economy is self-correcting over time. So, if we do nothing, eventually we will go back to full employment, the long-run aggregate supply. Now, what's about fiscal policy? There are only two tools in the toolbox of fiscal policy. They are government spending and taxations. So, if there are recessions, what do we do to government spending, or what could we do to taxes in order to stimulate the economy and get us out of recessions? Well, we can increase government spending or we can cut taxes. But wait, taxes are a shifter of aggregate demand. Well, lowering the taxes would increase consumer spending, which will shift aggregate demand to the right. The third option we can use is monetary policy. This is controlling the money supply to affect interest rate and shift aggregate demand. So, when we are in a recession, we want to increase the money supply. This will decrease interest rate and increase investment in consumption that will increase aggregate demand and close a recessionary gap. But what causes an increase in the money supply? I know that we need to increase money supply, but how do we do it? Well, there are three tools in the toolbox of monetary policy. They are the reserve requirement, the discount rate, and open market operation. So, what could the government do, which means central banks can create more money? They can lower the discount rates, which means they can loan out more money to banks, or they can buy more bonds. When the government buy bonds, it puts in the system, increasing the money supply. So, for the fiscal and monetary system, to aggregate demand is increasing. We are speeding up the economy using some sort of government intervention. And for no policy, we are just waiting it out and letting aggregate supply increase, putting us back to full employment. Now, if you understand all that, it's the same thing over again, except for an inflationary cap. So, when we have inflation, we only have three different options. We can use do no policy at all, we can use fiscal policy, or we can use monetary policy. If we wait this out, eventually when we have inflation, wages will go up and resources price will go up. So, costs go up, the firm's aggregate supply will shift to the left and put us back at full employment. For fiscal policy, we can either decrease government spending or we can increase taxes. Increase taxes which decrease disposable income and decrease consumer spending and therefore decrease aggregate demand. Again, remember, fiscal policy affects aggregate demand, whereas waiting is out and doing no policy will affect aggregate supply. And for monetary policy, the central bank increase the reserve requirement, increase the discount rate, or it can sell the bonds. Each of these scenarios will decrease the money supply, which will increase interest, decrease investment, decrease aggregate demand, and finally, the slowing down the economy. Alright, that's it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suhaila, and I'm going to talk about the current issue for the developing and developed countries.
Example for the current issue is war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine has a major commodities producer and disruptions have caused global price to soar, especially for oil and natural gas. Food cost has jumped with wheat, for which Ukraine and Russia are the main export for the oil and natural gas. For developing countries, which is German, for monetary policy, the Bundesbank predicted a growth in a real gross domestic product in Germany of 1.29% this year, but less than half of the 4.2% predicted in December 2021. Meanwhile, expected to growth in 2022 was cut to 2.4% from 3.2%. Its expected price would start to fall, and supply bottleneck will be gradually eased. For fiscal policy, this technocratic trick initially surprised many observers. Apparently, the use of these special funds has become a pet move of the traffic coalitions to circumvent Germany's fiscal rules. As Germany announced, there's another special fund worth 100 billion in February 2022 in order to increase military spending in the wake of a war in Ukraine. Developing countries, which is Malaysia, for monetary policy, Bank Negara Malaysia (BNM) raised the overnight policy rates (OPR) by 25 basis points to 2.25%. The OPR corridor ceiling and floor rates has been raised to 2.50% and 2.00% respectively according to the PNM monetary policy statement issued. Our corridor ceiling and floor rates has been raised to 2.50% and 2.00% respectively according to the PNM monetary policy statement issued. For fiscal policy, they should be focused on maintaining financial support for the poor and vulnerable and establishing a more inclusive social protection framework with a better targeting. Okay, next, fiscal policy need to improve a labor market condition to continue to support economic activity recovery. This have been partially offset by the impact of a rising cost pressure and with the military conflicts in Ukraine. So this is despite some improvement in a global supply chain condition, primarily due to the high commodity prices and a strong demand.
Hello and Assalamualaikum. My name is Mohammad Ammar bin Mazlan. I'm from class AP 224-1A. Okay, today I want to present about statistical data, fiscal policy and monetary policy. Okay, first thing I want to present is what is the difference between monetary and fiscal policy. Firstly, is changing the interest rate and affecting the money supply are both aspects of monetary policy. Government can alter tax rates and spending levels through the use of fiscal policy to affect the economy's total demand. Okay, next we go to comparison of fiscal policy and monetary policy. As you can see this, the left side is fiscal policy and the right side is monetary policy. Okay, next we go to monetary policy. Monetary policy is usually carried out by the central bank or monetary authorities and involved, such as setting base interest rate, example Bank of England in UK or Federal Reserve in US. Next is influencing the supply of money. Example, policy of quantitative easing to increase the supply of money. Okay, next, how monetary policy works. The central bank may have an inflation target of 2%. If they feel inflation is going to go above the inflation target due to economic growth being too quick, then they will increase interest rate. Okay, higher interest rate increasing borrowing costs and reduce customer spending and investment, leading to lower aggregate demand and lower inflation. If the economy went into recession, the central bank will cut interest rates. Okay, next we go to fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is carried out by the government and involves changing. Government makes fiscal policy to increase demand and economic growth. The government will cut tax and increase spending, which is leading to a higher budget deficit. Second is to reduce demand and reduce inflation. The government can increase tax rates and cut spending, or leading to a smaller budget deficit. Okay, the last one is example of expansionary fiscal policy. In a recession, the government may decide to increase borrowing and spend more on the infrastructure spending. The idea is that this increase in our government spending creates an injection of money into the company and helps to create jobs. There may also be a multiplier effect, where the initial injection into the economic cost of further round of higher spending. This increase in aggregate demand can help the economy to get out of recession. Okay, which is more effective, monetary or fiscal policy? In recent decades, monetary policy has become more popular because monetary policy is set by the central bank and therefore reduce political influence, such as politicians may cut interest rates in the desire to have a booming economy before a general election. Fiscal policy can have more supply side effects on the wider economy, such as to reduce inflation. Higher tax and lower spending will not be popular, and the government may be hesitant to pursue this. Also, lower spending could lead to reduced public service, and the higher income tax could create disincentive to works. Next is monetary a good expansionary fiscal policy is likely to cause crowding out. Higher government borrowing push up interest rate. However, the recent recession showed that monetary policy too can have many limitations, such as targeting inflation is too narrow. During the period 2000 until 2007, inflation was low, but central banks ignored as unsustainable boom in the housing market and bank lending. Next is liquidity traps. In a recession, cutting interest rate may prove insufficient to boost demand because banks don't want to lend and consumers are too nervous. Interest rate were cut from 5% to 0.5% in March 2009, but this doesn't solve recession in the UK. Even quantitative easing, creating money may be ineffective if banks just want to keep the extra money on their balance sheet.